Hello, Fall Feast friends. It's Debbie. I am back to talk today about what we can do as believers and followers of Messiah Yeshua, of Jesus Christ, to help his return come more quickly. So, we're going to start today with our Bibles. Make sure you have your Bible. We're going to start today in Matthew chapter 23, around verse 37. Okay, Matthew 23:37. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those sent to her. How often I longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you are not willing. Look, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will never see me again until you say, Baruch haba Bashem Adonai. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So what's going on in this verse? This is Messiah Yeshua speaking, and he's speaking to Jerusalem. He's speaking to Judah. Keep in mind that Israel is 12 tribes, but at this time, the tribes that were living in the land were basically Judah, Benjamin, and a few Levites, not the entire tribe, but a sprinkling of the tribe of Levi. So this group collectively is known as Judah, and that is who Messiah Yeshua is talking to here. He's saying, I will come back, but you're going to have to call me. You're going to have to say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And Messiah is quoting Psalm 118. He is quoting a passage in Psalm 118 where we see something kind of familiar. There are palm branches being laid down, and people are saying, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. They are preparing for their king. Their king is coming. Well, in Matthew 21, what do we see people doing? Do you remember what we collectively call Palm Sunday? Well, that is happening in Matthew 21. The people laid down their palm branches, and Messiah rode into Jerusalem on a donkey and presented himself as the king. And some of the people were ready to accept him. We see that. But ultimately, he needed the leadership. He needed the support of the leadership to be made king. Let's look in John chapter 19. The backstory to John 19 is Pilate has presented Yeshua, and he says, I find no fault with this man. Let's just scourge him and we'll let him go. And the leadership says no. The leadership, the ruling Kohanim, the ruling priests, they say to Pilate in an answer, we have no king but Caesar. And so, of course, we know the rest of that story. Pilate turns him over for crucifixion. So before, though, we get all, high and mighty and say, oh, the Jews, they crucified their Messiah. Yes, they turned him over. But who did they turn him over to? They turned him over to a Gentile who carried out the crucifixion. So guys, we're in this together. We're in this as deep as the Jews are. So let's keep that perspective as we continue this study. Okay, so if it takes calling our Messiah back, something comes to mind. And it is a story or a history. I like the word history better because stories seem to be make-believe, but history is real. There's a history about King David, who was in a similar situation one time. That history can be found in 2 Samuel. Let's go to 2 Samuel chapter 19. 2 Samuel chapter 19, I'm going to give you the backstory. This is when David's son Absalom had taken the throne. He somehow convinced the people of Israel, of all the tribes, to follow him. He took over the royal palace. He became the king. And David and his entourage had to flee. They fled across the Jordan River to a place of safety. But then his warriors, of course, were still fighting the battle against Absalom and eventually won. Absalom was killed. Initially, David was sad, but his commander said, hey, get over it, snap out of it. We need your leadership, and you need to support your people who saved your life and have allowed you to continue to be king. So David snapped out of it, and he's still across the Jordan, and he's waiting for something. So you've got to think about this for a minute. David fled east. He fled to the east, and to become the king, to return, where must he return from? He must cross the Jordan and return from the east. But when Absalom died, David didn't return immediately. He was waiting for something. Let's see what he was waiting for. 2 Samuel chapter 19. I'm going to begin around verse 9, at the end of verse 9. Meanwhile, Israel had fled, each man to his tent. All the people throughout all the tribes of Israel were at strife, saying, the king delivered us from the hand of our enemies, and he saved us from the hands of the Philistines. Yet now he had to flee from the land because of Absalom. But Absalom, who we anointed over us, has died in battle. So why are we silent about restoring the king? So Israel wants to restore the king. There's talk. Okay, they're sending their people over, trying to restore the king. Now, who is Israel? Israel are 10 tribes. Who is Judah? Judah are really 2 tribes. Okay, Levi sprinkles between or among all of them. But Judah is typically thought of as Judah and Benjamin, the 2 tribes that had the royalty. And then Israel is all the others. So this is all the others right now saying, let's restore the king. So David's hearing this, and he's like, well, that's great, but what about my people? Then King David sent word to Zadok and Abiathar the Kohanim, the priests, saying, speak to the elders of Judah, saying, why should you be last to bring the king back to his palace? The talk of all Israel had reached the king at his residence. You are my kinsman, my bone and my flesh. Why then should you be the last to bring back the king? So we see here, Israel is like, come back, come back, come back. But Judah has not yet called David back. What was David waiting for? He was waiting for his kinsman to call him back. It didn't matter to him that the other 10 tribes wanted him. What mattered to him was that his kinsman wanted him. Guess what Messiah Yeshua is waiting for? He's waiting for his kinsman, Judah, to call him back. So, Debbie, you told me that I could do something to hasten the return of Messiah Yeshua. But now you tell me that it takes Judah to call him back. So what are you talking about? Well, it does take Judah to call him back. And Judah today are the Jewish people of our world. They live all over the world. Many of them now, since 1948, have been returning to the country that is now called Israel. The people who are living there are Jews. They are of Judah. Other tribes are sprinkled in. They always have been, but it's the predominant tribe of Judah. Okay? Guess what Messiah is waiting for? He is waiting for Judah, the leadership even of Judah, to call him back. We are in a really unique place in history. Okay, for almost the last 2,000 years, that wasn't a possibility, because shortly after Yeshua ascended back into heaven, the Jews were dispersed around the world again. They have only come back collectively with strong leadership as a nation in 1948. This is a big deal, guys, because it takes a nation with leadership to call Messiah back. Okay, this is a huge big deal. Now, you don't have to like the politics of the nation of Israel. They're not perfect. I don't always like their politics. Sometimes I do. It's kind of that way with every country. But the important thing to recognize here is the miracle of the fact that they have been brought back. They are back in the land. They do have collective leadership now, so that when the time is right, they will be able to say, Baruch haba b'Shem Adonai, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, because they're back in their land and they're back together. Not everyone, but the potential is there. If a Jewish person wants to immigrate or make aliyah to the country of Israel now, there's a way for Jewish people to do that, and they are invited and welcome to do so. So that's a miracle all by itself, okay? Now, what can we do to help them come to the point where they recognize Yeshua and call him back? That's where I want to come in. Think about Romans 11:11 a minute. I'm not going to go there, but I'm going to tell you what it says, and you know what it says. This is pretty famous in the world that we live in. That believers, Gentile believers in Messiah Yeshua, are to provoke the Jews to jealousy for their Messiah. Now, I don't take that as a poke the bear kind of thing, like we're not supposed to be ugly or rude or, hurtful. It's not that kind of jealousy. We're just supposed to love and represent their Messiah so beautifully that they desire him too. Okay? There's a difference between being rude and hurtful and just being so obedient and faithful that we represent their Messiah well, so that they want him. So that's what I want to talk to you about today, is how we represent Messiah Yeshua. I think that there are a few patterns, habits, and traditions that the Christian church got involved in pretty early on that have perhaps been a deterrent to Judah recognizing her own Messiah. So when I talk about the church and Christians, I want you to know I'm not talking about a particular denomination. I'm not talking about people in general as individuals. I'm talking about Christendom in general. I'm talking about the ecclesia, the called out ones. I'm talking about, people like me and you and millions of other people in this world who claim that Yeshua is the Messiah. Okay, throughout history, we've done it better and we've done it worse. I think right now there's a trend of people reading their Bibles and understanding him maybe a little more authentically and representing him maybe a little more authentically. And here's what I mean by that. In history times past, this book was illegal. People were burned at the stake for translating it. Read your history. People, this dusty thing on your bookshelf and my bookshelf, people died. Multiple people died making sure that this got into our hands. Okay, that's very humbling. Prior to that, before the printing press, very few people even had a scroll to copy from, to read from. Oh, and then there's reading. People weren't literate. It wasn't a literate world. There weren't books to read. What was the point? They were agrarian. They were, working with their hands just to stay alive, just to grow food. So we live in a really unique place in history. We have access to this book in a way that people before us have never had access before. And as we read it, we are beginning to see and learn things that generations before us missed. And so hold your rocks and your tomatoes, because we're not going to throw them at those future generations. We're just going to start to recognize those traditions now. We need to evaluate them and decide if they're productive. So when Constantine got involved in Christian politics, he did a few things. He made a few changes. He made Christianity legal in the Roman Empire, which helped a lot of people, because prior to that, many, many people had been martyred in horrible, horrible ways. So that stopped, which is a good thing. But some bad habits got worked in. Among those bad habits were decisions that were made politically to unify Rome. So Rome and many other pagan civilizations were big time into sun worship. So to unify everybody, they decided, we've got these pagan sun worshipers and they need a day, and we've got these followers of Jesus, they need a day. Let's just declare Sunday the day. And that's a real abbreviated and simplified version, but that's how we came up with Sunday as our day of rest. It was a political decision to unify Rome. Other political decisions to unify Rome came in the form of when we celebrate Christmas and when we celebrate Easter. Now, you can do your research and your homework and learn the pagan origins of both of those holidays. There are a plethora of websites and books and documented resources out there to tell you all about those holidays and where they originated and what they're really about. But I'm going to appeal to you from a different direction, because a lot of people I know that know about Christmas and Easter and their pagan origins, they say, yeah, but that was then. We don't celebrate it that way now. And they don't. They celebrate Christmas and Easter with Jesus in their heart and the best of intentions, and they do good things, and they give offerings and they help the poor and they give gifts to people, and it's hard to argue that they're doing anything pagan. But as we read through the Bible over and over and over again, I hope you're doing that. As we read through the Bible, we see that the Father does not like substitutes. He doesn't like our substitute holidays. Go back to 1 Kings, I think it's 1 Kings 12. Yes, go back to 1 Kings 12 and see what he thought about Jeroboam's substitute holiday. Jeroboam had become a king. He was from the line of Ephraim, which is not a royal line. But after Solomon's son Rehoboam could not hold the kingdom together. And so Rehoboam retained Judah, but he lost the other 10 tribes. So they went to this Jeroboam, and Jeroboam realized real quickly that he had a political problem. he was afraid that his people were going to go back to Jerusalem and realize that they had messed up and go back to King Rehoboam. Why would they need to go back to Jerusalem? Well, because if you'll recall, these feasts that we've just celebrated, 3 times a year, the men were to appear in Jerusalem at the temple. And so one of those feasts that people needed to appear for was Sukkot. Now, if you'll remember, Sukkot took place in the 7th month. I know you know that. We've talked about this 7th month forever now. Well, listen to what King Jeroboam did. Here's his history is here in 1 Kings chapter 12. You're going to love this. He also made shrines on the high places and appointed priests from among the people who were not the sons of Levi. Then Jeroboam instituted a festival in the 8th month, on the 15th day of the month, imitating the festival that is in Judah. Now, what festival is he imitating? We know. The festival of the 15th day of the 7th month, which is Sukkot. So Jeroboam basically said, hey, don't listen, folks. That's too far for you to travel. Too expensive. We'll do it here. We're gonna have our own party. So you just stay here. Don't go to Jerusalem, and you stay here, and we'll have a feast. We'll do it next month, this same time. And so he convinced the people to stay in Samaria with him and not go to Jerusalem in obedience. And he imitated the Feast of Sukkot in the 8th month. And if you continue to read through 1 Kings, you will quickly find out that the father did not think very much of that idea at all. As a matter of fact, all through the scripture, anytime we see worship of something that was not him, or worship in a place that he didn't want, he always wanted those things torn down. He never wanted them to be reinvented or remade. He always wanted those places to be torn down and destroyed. But Jeroboam is not tearing down and destroying. He actually created 2 places for it to happen. They could go to Bethel or they could go to Dan. He made it super convenient for them. And so we find out as we keep reading through 1 Kings that Jeroboam is cursed. He is cursed so that his entire family will be cut off. He will not have one survivor from his lineage. And if you keep reading through your chronology of 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, you will see that that is exactly what happened. Not one person remained from his house. Now, would you say that this feast that imitated Sukkot was a good thing or a bad thing in light of that evidence? We all know the answer here. This was not okay. So, going back to Rome for a moment, in early Christianity, we find that early believers began separating themselves from Jews because Jews were persecuted heavily. Christians were too, but Jews seemed to get a little more of it. Also, a lot of Jews were separating themselves from believers. Not all of them appreciated believers either. And then you've got the politics of Rome involved. And Rome's trying to placate everyone. Let's satisfy all the little groups and keep everybody happy, because the big thing about Rome was they wanted peace. They wanted everybody to be okay and nobody to be in a big uprising, and everybody just follow along, do what you're supposed to do, and keep everything cool. Well, the way that Rome went about that in this instance is giving everybody a little bit of what they wanted. So, the Christians, a lot of them were okay with Sunday being the day that was set apart, because They believe that Christ rose on the first day of the week, and so they felt like that was an okay thing. You can decide how you feel about that. I think anytime you go against what the Father says, just because it seems like a good idea, is something to step back from and think about. But it seemed to please everybody at the time, and they went with it. Then you've got these holidays of Christmas and Easter. Easter was actually put in place to separate believers from Passover, from the Jews. So over time, Christians just forgot about Passover. I didn't know anything about Passover as a Christian until 7-8 years ago. Yeah. And then Christmas is the time that we celebrate the birth of Messiah Yeshua. But there's nothing in this book about celebrating Christmas. There's nothing in this book about December 25th. There's nothing in this book about Christmas trees or Santa Claus or mistletoe or any of those other things, the nativity play down at the local church. We don't have that here, okay? So we have added traditions in because of political issues in Rome, okay? There were people that wanted to celebrate the calends of January. There were people who wanted to still celebrate Saturnalia. And, let's let the Christians be part of this too. We'll just celebrate Christ's birth at that time. And it just all got amalgamated together. And so now what we have in the ecclesia, in Christendom, in the church, big picture, I'm not talking about individuals, I'm talking about the big picture, is this Roman picture of Jesus who dyes Easter eggs and who has a birthday celebration that includes Santa Claus presents, a lot of jolliness. Is it any wonder that Judah does not recognize her Messiah? I'm going to leave you with that thought today. I'm going to tell you this, though. These things that have been passed down to us, these traditions that have been passed down to us, they've been passed down. We didn't know. We didn't know any better. It took me years to even ask the questions that seem so obvious now, like, well, why would we do these things? Why do I color Easter eggs with my daughter? I did. Okay, why do we have Easter baskets? Why are we, why that day after Thanksgiving, why does everything just get so festive and jolly? Why put a green wreath on my door? Why put a tree in my living room? Why are we celebrating Jesus' birth at a time of year when he would not have been born? Why are we doing these things? Why did it take me 40 years to ask that question? So guys, I'm holding my stones and I'm holding my rotten tomatoes. I'm not throwing them at you. I don't want you throwing them at yourself either, or me, please. But I want us to think, how did we get here? And how does this keep our brother Judah from recognizing her Messiah? And what are we willing to do? What changes are we willing to make for our brother Judah's sake? Are we willing to start asking some hard questions? And are we willing to give a few things up if it means less suffering for them and a sooner return for Messiah Yeshua? I'll leave you with that today. Have a great day.